What's up, everybody? Welcome to Codetega. My name is LeVar, and today we're going to be going over how to create a React app utilizing Firebase Firestore and their authentication system. So let's get started. First things first, we just want to make a directory in which we want to work with our project. I'm just going to call this one Firebase Project. Once that's created, change directory into it. So I'm going to work out of today. You can name it whatever you want. And then the first thing that we want to do is just create our React app. So that's going to be npx create React app, and then call it whatever you want. I'm going to call mine Codetega. Feel free to call yours whatever you want. Awesome. Now, once you've created your React app and it's finished loading, go ahead and change directory into your newly created React app. So cd into it, and then you're just going to open it up in your code editor. I'm using Visual Studio Code, whatever code editor you like, go ahead and use that. But I'm going to be working out of Visual Studio Code today. So now I'm in my React app. As you can see, it installed all the components, necessary components, and architecture. So we have our app.js file. The next thing that we want to do is install all our dependencies. So for this project, we're going to be utilizing a few different dependencies. We're going to be using Firebase, React Router DOM, which is pretty standard for our routing system. Tailwind CSS, that's my favorite CSS library. So we're going to be installing that. Tailwind comes with a couple extra dependencies if you want to utilize them. One of them being aspect ratio, the other one being forms, and the other one being typography. So I'm going to install all three of those. And then I'm also going to install a React UI component called headless UI. It's pretty standard. That you'll find that a lot in Tailwind if you're not familiar with Tailwind. So I'm going to install all those dependencies. The ones that you need for this project are the Firebase, React Router DOM, and Tailwind CSS. Awesome. Once that has finished installing and we've got all our dependencies necessary to continue, we're going to initialize our Tailwind library. So all we need to do for that is npx Tailwind CSS init, and that should initialize our Tailwind config file. So you can see it created a new file called Tailwind config. And all we're going to do for this is we're going to update a couple things so that it can be utilized in our React app. And so in our content file, we just want to place the source folder and then the HTML, JS, and JSX tags in our content so that we can utilize them. And then those, if you downloaded those three dependencies, typography, forms, and aspect ratio, we can go ahead and import those as well. I'll just, you just go down into plugins, and then you will require those within that array. And now our Tailwind is installed and our config file is there. But to top it off and to finalize it, what we need to do is actually utilize Tailwind in our CSS file. So if you want to go to your index.css, remove all of that. And we want @Tailwind base, @Tailwind components, and @Tailwind utilities installed in our CSS file, just like this. Now, that should be imported in your index.js file right here. I'm going to go ahead and remove the app.css file because I don't need that for this. And I'm also going to remove that import statement out of the app.js file so it doesn't break our code when we start our React app. So that's how we install Tailwind CSS in our React application. The next thing that we want to do is in our source folder, we want to create a context file. Now, if you're familiar with React, you'll know what context is. If you're not familiar with React, let me give you a little bit of a rundown of how context works. So in React, we have our our variables that we utilize throughout our app. And on some pages or components, we'll utilize variables that are going to change. And if they're going to change and they're going to be needed to be manipulated or called or set on that page, those are generally local variables to that component or that page. But some things require global context. So we're going to wrap our entire application around a global context component that will allow us to access variables and data throughout our entire app without it having to refresh and pull that data from our backend later on. So the way that we do that is by creating something called context. And there's multiple ways to do this. I prefer context. There's different libraries out there like Recoil. Man, I've been so long I forgot most of them because I generally use context. But use whatever you want for global state management. For this project, we're going to just utilize context. So go ahead and create a folder, context. And now we want to create a file, auth_context.jsx. Look something like this. So to begin, what we want to do is we're going to import some libraries from React for this context to work. And those are create context, and use state. The next thing we want to do is actually initialize our context by calling it as a variable, and I'm going to use user context, and we're going to create context using the React library create context function. Next, we want to export this. I'm going to call it user auth because what I'm going to be storing in this context is all the user data that is needed throughout the app. So no matter where they go within the website, they can access their data, and we can display things like their name or their email address or their phone number. So to do that, we want to export a function. User auth is what I'm going to call. It's going to return the user context in the use context function supplied by React. The next thing we want to do is actually create our component. And I'm going to make this one pretty simple for now, and we'll update it later. And so what this will look like is your simple standard React component default function with an auth context provider is what I'm going to call this one, because that's what it is. It's providing authentication context to the application, and it's going to be able to take values within that context, and whatever children is wrapped within inside of the context provider is going to have access to all the data we store here in this context. And if this doesn't make any sense, you can go ahead and read about it on React documentation, or you can follow along and see if you can make sense of it. So a couple things that I did here is logged out, set is logged out to true. What we're going to do is we're going to update whether or not the user is logged in or logged out through our context. And this will help us route our user depending on whether or not they are logged in through our Firebase system. The next thing we want to do is actually wrap our entire application around this context. So what we do is now go to the index file, and we're going to remove this React strict mode. You can develop in strict mode if you're unfamiliar with React, but you generally don't want to go to production while it's still in strict mode. So first things I'm going to do is I'm going to import browser router from React router DOM. And what this is going to do is this is going to allow us to route our app. If you're familiar with routing or routes or React router, or especially React router DOM, we're just going to wrap our entire app here in the index file with our browser router so that we can create routes for the user throughout our application. And they can go from page to page or from different components depending on authentication and yeah, depending on roles and all that stuff that we define later. So I'll save my auth context, save my browser router. The next thing we want to do is wrap that context around the app. So that we do that, we're just going to import our auth context provider, and we're just going to wrap it around our app. So now anything inside of our app component is going to have access to those variables like is logged out inside of our application. So it should look something like this, and we are set within our index.js file, and I'm not going to touch that anymore. So I'll just close out of that. The next thing we want to do is actually create the router that we just wrapped our component app around. And so what I like to do is just create another folder, and we'll call it routes. And I create two routers basically within this directory. First one I call user routes, and we'll just give that a JSX tag, and then we'll just create a functional component, user routes for now, and then we'll create another one, and we'll call this non-user routes.jsx, and same thing, create a functional component for non-user routes. Now in our app file, I'm going to remove everything that's there, and I'm just going to create a simple div tag. And then inside of it, I'm going to actually, I'm going to import that is logged out function that's in our context right here. So what we're going to do is I'll keep this open so we can reference it. And then let me close this and see if I can zoom in a little bit. No, I'm not going to deal with that right now. But anyways, we're going to call this is logged out. So if we want to walk through this context, basically we've created a state variable. This is how we manage state within React, as we utilize use state, use effect, and some of the hooks. And this one, we're just going to set a Boolean value to true because they are not logged in currently. So as it comes packaged, when they come to our app, they're not logged in. And then in the context provider, to send to the children, we have to send this prop value is logged out through the wrapper. And now the children of auth context provider have access to that variable. So how we call that variable within the app is any component that you want to use that's wrapped inside. We can now access it by just calling it here. And we'll just set this one is logged out. And the format will look something like this, and we'll just call that user auth context that we created in our context right here. We're going to call this use context, user context. It's going to have access to that is logged out function. And if we were to console log that, it would show that it's is logged out as true. Next, we're just going to do a simple ternary operator. There's different ways how you want that you can handle this, but for this course or this little tutorial alone, we're just going to make it super simple. Is logged out. And then we'll just create a ternary operator. Is if they're logged out, they're going to have access to the non-user routes. So make sure you import that. And if they are logged in, they're going to have access to the user routes. Just import that and boom. Now our ternary operator will let us determine whether or not that user is logged in or logged out and send them to the proper routing mechanism that we create here in our React app. So let's actually just test this real quick. So go ahead and start your React app with npm start. Give it a second to load, and then we're just going to look at this and see if we get what we expect here. Since is logged out is set to true, we should get non-user routes, which would look like this. So we should actually just see context on the page that says non-user routes. And here we go, it's loading. Takes a second sometimes, especially if it's the first time rendering it. All right, perfect. We got non-user routes just like we had planned or expected to see when we did this. So let's go right here. I will list off non-user routes. Let's go back to our app. And sure enough, is logged out, non-user routes. Now let's say we just put this as a false value. We should now get user routes in our React app. So that's how we're going to manage for this project, how we're going to manage authentication and authorization on how they get to the proper routes and the pages that should be displayed for them. Next, what we want to do, let's just expand this now. The next thing that I like to do is I want to just set up the pages for these routes. So I'll just, in the source directory, I'll just create a directory called pages. And you can set up and architect your app however you want. But for this tutorial, I'm just going to create a pages directory. And inside, I'm going to call home.jsx. And we'll do another functional component where it just displays home, another page. And we'll call this one login. And this is where we'll create our login functionality here shortly on how a user can log in. Next, we're going to do create user.jsx rfc. Yeah, I'm just going to delete that. I misspelled it. Page. All right. Create user.jsx rfc. Now we got to create user page, and then we'll do the user dashboard for users that are logged in. And now we have 4 pages that we can utilize in our routing mechanism. So let's close out all of these, getting a little messy. And we'll go to just our user routes and our non-user routes. First, our non-user routes. All we want to do is create it. We're going to import routes and routes, or route and routes from React Router DOM. So if you just want to import route and routes from React Router DOM, this is how we're going to create our routes. Our first route is going to be path, just slash, like this is going to be our standard home page. And the element that we want for standard home page is just our home route. So import that home component or page. Created home, right? Yeah. So not sure why it's not importing home, but we'll do that. Compiled still fine. And then also for non-user routes, we want to create a user. So we'll do path equals, I'll just call create user. And we'll do element home create user. And then the next one we want to do is login, because we don't want this to be something that they only have access to if they, and then we'll import our login function. All right, so for our route, let's just test these out. We'll go back to our browser. And so, yeah, we're getting home at that home. So if we go to create user in the URL, we should get create user. And then if we do login, we should get login. But what happens if we go to like, I don't know, get started? We get nothing. There's a blank page there. So the way that I mitigate that is I actually don't create a 404 page. What instead I do is just copy this home path, and I'll use the all symbol for anything that is not one of these two routes will always redirect us back to home. So no matter now what we type in here, we'll always go home. So as long as it's not one of those two routes, that's what happens. So now let's go to our user routes, and all we're really going to import here is our user dashboard. I'm not going to create a route functionality for the users. I'm just going to put everything on the dashboard for now. I do. Messed up somewhere. There we go. There we go. All right, there we go. So let's just test that. Go back to our app function, and we'll test it by putting an exclamation mark in front of is logged out, resulting in a false statement. And now we have our user dashboard. So perfect. Doesn't matter what we type here because we'll always just have our user dashboard because it's not actually a route. It's just a functional component that's going to display for any user that's logged in. Okay, so now we have our route set up and we have our logic set up for whether or not they're going to be logged in. Next thing we want to do is we want to create our Firebase directory. So let's go here, Firebase, and then inside Firebase, you can create a file. Did I not create it? Did something. Just create Firebase. There we go. Now create a full file in there. I'm going to call mine fire.js. Create a JavaScript file for Firebase. Rename. I want fire, not file. Typos today, Brett. All right, here we go. All right, once we've created this file, the next thing we want to do is we're going to import a couple different things. We've installed Firebase when we installed all our dependencies. So we want to import initialize app, get Firestore. I'm going to remove get storage for now. We don't need that. And then get auth. And then what we want to do is just create, a const Firebase config object. And we'll leave this blank for now because we're going to put stuff in it once we go to Firebase. And then we're going to initialize the app with the Firebase config file that we put in later. And then we want to export database, which is get Firestore. And then we want to export our auth, which is get auth. And what these will do is these are now our backend of service functions with Firebase to allow us to do CRUD operations to Firestore and to log in and log out through the authentication that Firebase provides with their auth function, get auth. And then we're going to call these DB anytime we need to write or read to the database. we're going to call that constant variable. And then if we need to do anything with authentication, log them in, create a user, or log out, we're going to call that auth variable, which is now exported and able to be used throughout the app. All right, so let's go to the Firebase console and let's get our Firebase project set up. So just firebase.google.com. I'm just going to go to console, and what we're going to do is we're going to create our first project. If you've already created projects, you're familiar with this. And we're going to call this one Code Tega. This, you call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it Code Tega and sign off. I'm not going to enable Google Analytics for this project. You guys can if you want to. Not a big deal either way. It's not going to change anything for this tutorial. So while that's being created, let me explain to you a little bit about Firebase if you're unfamiliar with it. It's a really, really cool feature / tool that Google offers people that is a little bit different than your conventional databases, especially SQL databases that you're familiar with. So no SQL based database. And the way that they charge, or the way it gets processed or have any cost associated, is based on reads and writes generally. There's some other cost factors that go into it, and you can go explore those in your plan. But for the most part, it's really free and it's really easy to scale. So you can build your entire application on Firebase and React, or Firebase and Express, or Vue, or Angular, and it's easy to scale because it's not going to cost you almost any money to get started. So go ahead, once you've created your project, go over here and click the web tool and call it whatever you want. I'm going to stick with the same name, Code Tega, and I'm not going to set up Firebase hosting yet. And then we're just going to register the app. When you do this, it's going to give you that Firebase config file that we had earlier. So we've already installed Firebase. We've already done all this in our project. All we really need to do is just copy this Firebase config file. And then we go back to our project, into our JavaScript, Firebase JavaScript, and paste it right here for your Firebase config file. And this is going to have all your keys and domains and all the good stuff. And then go ahead and save that. Now, once we've done this, what we want to do is set up our Firebase store. We're going to continue doing that. So we'll go to Continue Console, and we're going to go into this Build dropdown, and we're going to add authentication. So it's going to give you a little bit of a rundown. You could watch these videos if you want. We're going to click Get Started, and the one that we're going to use for this tutorial is email and password. So we just want to enable email and password. We're going to leave this one unchecked because we're actually going to let them create their password. We're going to save it, and now we have that enabled. The next thing we want to do is go into our Firestore database dropdown, and we want to set this up. So we're going to create a database. A second, pick where location you want. I'm going to put NAM5, and then we're going to go next. And we're just going to start in test mode, and I'll go into the rules here shortly. But for now, we're just going to start in test mode. We're going to go create. And basically, test mode rules will let us read and write to the database up until a certain date that we set. So right now, this will just go until March 4th of 2024. But we'll go in and create rules here in this tutorial. All right, we've done that. We've set up our authentication, and now we want to go back to our project. And what we're going to do is we're going to create our function file. So go to your source directory, and we're going to create a folder or directory called functions. And I'm going to create two files in here. I'm going to create one called auth.js, and this is going to handle all our authentication and with Firebase. And then we're going to create another one. I'm just going to call this CRUD or helpers.js, the two ones that I use the most. So let's just start with our CRUD.js since we have that open. We're going to import a couple things from Firebase Firestore. Now, if you don't know what CRUD is, it's create, read, update, and delete. So these are our four main functions for updating and deleting things out of the database. What I'm about to show you is not how I would recommend setting up your app, but for demonstration purposes, this is what I'm going to do, and actually just create functions to do all our CRUD operations. But I would actually recommend creating functions for specific tasks and not just generalizing it in the way I'm going to do for this tutorial. But if you want a fast, quick way to get this up and running, this one is a great way to do it. The next thing we want to do is import our database from that Fire file. So we created that file. We want to import this database from Get Firestore. So now we have access to it. So we've imported our collection, delete doc, get docs on snapshot, which I'll explain here in a second, and then set doc. Let's do a Firebase has a really cool, unique way of generating random identification processes to your documentation, but I like to control my own UID generator. So you can do this however you want, but here's the function that I wrote for this. It's just create a random ID. And this allows you just to write to the database so you don't have to read the database again in order to look for that UID that is assigned to whatever you write. Let's go back real quick and I'll explain this to you if you're not familiar with Firestore. You have these things called collections, which are like it's like a folder. Imagine this as a directory, and we'll just call this directory. You can call it whatever you want. And then inside the directory, you can have specific documents. So what I'm talking about on that identification is it will automatically create these identifications for you, but you have to go read the document again to get that identification back or log the return statement when you create something in the database. I just prefer to create my own because then I can create a function or a system to how I create and organize my documents. But if you want to let them create it for you, you can do that too. But let's say we create a document and we'll call this classes. And then in this field, or I'll just call it class because each class should have its own document. So we'll go class, and then we'll call this field title. And then we can choose from what type it is. There's tons, an array, and then an object in Firebase Firestore is called a map. So if you're looking for an object and you want to store it as an object, that's a map, and then an array is an array. So these two are a little bit different, but even though you would map over an array in JavaScript, that can be a little confusing for people who are not quite familiar with Firebase Firestore. But either way, let's just create a title and we'll call it, this is a test. So you can kind of see how the format of Firebase Firestore works. Collection, document, and then we can just always have as many documents as we want within our collection. And you can start collections within documents and get a different type of hierarchy if you need to do that. But now if we called this document by class, we would get the title and we could log that for the user. But anyways, that's just a brief explanation. You can go look up Firebase if you're unfamiliar with it later. So I create a random generator for my IDs. Next, let's do a create function. So the way we do that is we're going to export it because we want to be able to use it throughout our entire app. And I'm going to call that create. Let's just do it simple, create data. And it's going to take a collection name and data type. So like this will be an object for us or an array or whatever we want to log to the database. First things we want to do is we want to get an ID. And so I'm going to call that generate random ID. So we're going to call this function and create a random ID. And then I'm just going to do a try catch. And then let's just do catch error. And then we'll console log the error if there's an error. And then we'll close off that function. And let's write that function inside of our try. So the first thing we want to do is I'm going to follow standard Firebase documentation. And we're going to call this a doc reference number. And so it's going to be the doc, which we're importing, database, which we're importing, the collection name, whatever we send through this function. So if we wanted to call it users, whatever we want to call that collection name in Firestore right here, whatever we want to call that, that's what we're going to pass as an argument within our function. And then the data that we want to pass to the create data function. And now what we want to do, so we create the document reference, and then we're going to await, and we're going to set doc, and we're going to go doc ref with the data. And so when you're utilizing a backend as service, you're using predefined functions that are created by Firebase in order for us to read and write to the database. One of the things I'm leaving out here is I wanted to add that ID. So we're just actually going to turn that into an object. We're going to add the ID, and then we're going to iterate over the data to make sure that it's logged or sent to our database with that ID. So it should be sending an entire object with the ID and the data that we send through this function. And so as an example, let me write real quick to kind of show you how it works is let's say we had const test data and we wanted to send this through. It could say name, John Doe, age, email, tester at gmail.com. And boom, here's our object that we can pass right here. And then we could call that function anywhere throughout our React app by calling the collection and passing the test data. And then if we were to pass this or call this anywhere, we would generate and create data into our Firebase Firestore. And we'll test that here in a second because we're actually going to log all of our users into the users collection. Okay. Next, we're going to do read data. It's going to be very similar. So it'll look something like this, and this will allow us to read any data from the Firebase Firestore database, Firestore database, read data, pass the collection and the ID that we want to collect on. And then we're going to pass the doc ref, await get doc, which is the function provided by Firestore in order for us to get the document reference that we're passing. If the doc exists, then we're going to console log the doc data and return that doc data. Otherwise, we're going to console log there's no such document and the error message. Update, very similar. Let me just copy this real quick. And then what we're going to do for update is instead of set doc is actually update doc with the doc ref and the ID. So we're going to get the doc ref, which is going to be the ID, and we're going to update it by the ID. And then we're going to pass whatever data we need to update within it. So we only pass object or variables within the object that need to be updated. If there is no variable that is being passed for an object or a variable inside of our data collection, it's not going to get updated. So this is a very slick tool where you don't have to pass all the data in order to update the document. You just have to pass whatever variable you want to update. And this function, update doc, will take care of that for you and find what has changed and change it for you in the database. Super slick. And then delete data. This is the easiest function to write. And then you pass a collection name, the ID, and then we're going to create a doc ref, and then we're just going to await and delete that doc. And it'll be deleted from. There's no check. You have to create your own check and your own error handle with this. Is it's not going to ask you, are you sure you want to delete it? It's literally going to delete it. So be very careful when you're writing your delete functions with Firebase. Perfect. And let's just do one. Yeah, this is a great day. Read all data. What we'll do for this is this will say, like, let's say we need all the data in the collection itself. I just realized, should we be good? I'd actually get away from using the word collection, but we're good here because there is one that, as we're going to see right here, it is a import statement that you can import the variable collection from Firebase Firestore. So for naming convention, I actually wouldn't use new collection as the name. I'd probably do new collection or collection name as the argument, but this will work for now. I'm just going to call this one new collection just so actually we'll just change it to make more sense. Collection name. All right, so we're going to pass the collection name into the get docs, and it's going to call the entire collection from that database and get all the documents for each document in that collection. We're going to get it. And as you can see, let's see here, we're using, yeah. So we're just going to push the new data array, get that new data array, and return all the documents in that collection with read all data. Now I'm just going to, this is a bonus, but it's a slick bonus. It's a Firebase. The more you learn about it and the more you read about it, if you're unfamiliar with it, is we have these snapshot listeners that can listen to updates on the database that you can put into your React app so that if anything changes in the database from another user at any point, or you update it and the users need access to that updated data, they don't have to refresh their page. It literally listens and updates that documentation. It's pretty cool. So it just listens for changes, and we do that with the on snapshot function. So we do the collection ref, the collection name, and then we just snapshot listen for that, any changes that would happen. And then we do the callback. So the callback here is whatever variables we want to set on that component itself in that local state. We can call back and set that new updated data in that component to utilize. Pretty cool operation, and we can get into that later. Okay, next we're going to create our auth.js functions. So we need a way for users to log in, log out, and create accounts with our React app. So we're going to import a couple different things. First, we're going to import from Firebase auth. We're going to import create user with email and password. And then we're also going to import sign in with email and password from the Firebase auth library. The next thing we want to import is both the database and the auth variables that we created in our fire.js file. So let's just close this out. We're importing our auth.db and from our fire JavaScript file. And the last thing we want to import is from Firebase Firestore, because anytime a user creates an account, we want to create a spot in the database for that user to store all their data, and we're going to store in the users collection. And to do that, we need to import the doc and set doc functions from Firestore. To sign in, super simple. We're just going to create a function called sign in, and it's going to take email and password. It's going to, I don't need to console log that. It's going to do a try catch. We're going to await sign in with email and password with the auth, with the auth function that's initialized in our Fire app. We're going to pass the email and the password, and it's going to log in with that function, and then it's going to return that user. So that's how we create a sign-in. Super simple. A few lines of code. Logout's even more simple. Once they're logged out, all we really got to do is terminate that connection, and we do that with the auth sign out function that comes standard with our auth function from our Fire JavaScript file. It's just going, it doesn't even matter because it's stored in an IndexedDB database spot in our cookies or in our storage on our application. And so it just looks for that token and removes it and signs them out. Next is the sign up function. And so it's going to be similar to what we created in our CRUD operations. We're just going to keep it separated from the CRUD because it has to do more with auth than it actually has to do with updating database schema. So sign up, it's going to take an email, password, and the user data we want to store in the Firestore database. So we call the function create user with email and password, pass the auth, the email, and the password, and then we set the new document in the user's collection with the user UID that is created with the create user with email and password. We're going to install or import that user data into that function or into that object with the new UID and store it as one object in the document in the user's collection, and then we're going to return that user. So basically, to sign anybody up, we need to pass their data, their email, and their password, and then we can sign them up. This will create an authentication. It'll create a login for them to be able to auth through our site, and it's going to allow them to read and write to our database that we set when we go into the rules. Let's actually do that now. While I'm thinking about it, let's go into the rules on your Firestore app. Go back to your console, go to Firestore. And for our rules, we're going to remove all this. Well, if it lets me, there we go. There we go. Remove everything in here. And what we want to do is we're going to do our rules version is 2. We want service, and we're going to use the cloud.firestore service. And we're going to do the object here. And what we want to do is match anything in the documents. So it'll look like this, actually. Let me just copy all this. Change it. And then you can copy it off here, and I'll post it on my website so you can just copy and paste. But let me just walk you through this real quick. Any document in the user's collection you can read if you are authorized. Like if you signed up through the authentication system in our app, they can read anything in the user's documents. You cannot write to it, or you can write to it no matter what. So if we're creating new users, they can write to the database, but you can only read the database if you're an authorized user. That's how you would write something like that. And if we didn't want them to write, it would look similar to this. But this function just lets you match that user's collection and any document in that collection. For the entire database after that, we won't want anybody who isn't authorized to read or write to any of the other component or any of the other collections. So to do that, match any document to read and write. They can't do it if their request auth is null. So pretty simple. We're going to publish that. And so now our rules have been updated and it's a little bit safer than just the dates that we had earlier in the rules spot. So let's just set that up for now and call it good. Let's go back to our application. Okay, sweet. Now that we have our functions written, what we want to do is actually create our login. So let's go back to our app and make sure we don't have any issues. All right, we are still at home. They have not logged in. So let's go to, on our home page, let's just do some fun React stuff real quick, just to kind of get into the groove. Let's just create a few links, like our little navigation. Do home. We'll do login. Whoops. H1 login. And then we'll do create user. H1 register. That'll work. Make sure it's still there. And then what we're going to do is, all right, we got these. Let's have home actually take a prop called children. If you're familiar with React, you'll understand what I'm doing here. And then in our user route or non-user routes, what we're going to do is we're going to remove home. You know what? I don't like this. Keep home. My apologies. What we're going to do is we're going to create a component. So let's go into source. Let's go components, and then we'll create a component called navbar.jsx. And then we'll just make that a functional component, copy everything we just did in our home app or our home component, and we'll just put that in the navbar instead. Now, let's just change these actually to links. So we'll call this, link import from React Router DOM. Call this one to home. We'll do another one called create user, which is register, and then we'll create one for login. And now what we want to do is we'll go to our non-user routes, and we're going to make sure the navbar takes that prop children like we had talked about. And then down here underneath the nav, we're just going to call the children's prop down below. And so basically now if anything that's wrapped inside of navbar will have access to the navigation. So for the non-user routes, what we want to do is we want to import that navbar and close it off. And we're going to wrap our entire route, all our routes in that navbar. So now, no matter where we go in that navbar, when we click on it, well, we did links, right? Let's make sure we did it correctly. Navbar should be link React Router DOM, nav. Oh, dir. All right, sorry guys. A little slow right now. All right, we've got this. We just got to remove it from the home. So let's go back to home. How it was before. All right, see. We'll just set it up. So it's just home. Now, let's go back. Here's our nav bar up here, home. We go to register, login. Our navigation works. Let's give those some separation. Let's go to our nav bar. And what we'll do here is I'll just go class, name. We'll go flex, items, center. and then we'll give it a gap X of 4 and just see how that looks. So we got some gap between them. And just to distinguish them to be just a little bit differently, we'll just give these each a class name of text blue 500, and then hover, we'll do text blue 700. And then we'll just copy those for all our routes. Now we should see some blue. Boom. Now we can distinguish a little bit differently. All right, so now we're at home. Let's create our register component. Go in here. I'm not going to really be styling it too much just for this purpose. You guys can use Tailwind to style it however you want. Tailwind's super slick. Let's just do input. We'll go text placeholder, first name, input, last name. We need email. We need password. Let's do a confirm pass. Let's do one more password, but let's make it a confirm password. And we'll write some confirmation logic in order for us to do this. So let's look here, register, first name, last name, email, password, confirm password, register. We'll make let's just go back here and we'll do this instead. Column, class name. Let's just make this grid, columns 2, and then we'll go gap 4 for those. We should get something, yeah. And now let's just make the max width a little bit more readable so it's not quite as wide. So we'll go max width. Let's do 5XL, and then we'll center it by using the MX auto class. Boom. And let's just give it a title to make it look a little bit slicker. So in React, you can wrap them with these empty tags if you want, but everything in a functional component, if you're unfamiliar in the return statement, all has to be wrapped in one tag. So I'll just use that for now. We'll do a heading, class name, and we'll just call it register, and let's see what we got here. Perfect. And let's give it a little bit padding here at the bottom so it's not quite so obvious. All right, super simple, nothing crazy. And then we'll make that button a little bit more stylish, shouldn't we? Class name, boom, register. All right, sweet. There's a registration page, nothing on the login page. Now, if you know how to use React, this is going to be you can go ahead and skip, but if you don't and you want some lessons on how React kind of works, this is great for you. So we want some use state variables. So we're going to go constant first name, set first name, and we're going to import use state from React. Same for last name, same for email, same for password, and same for confirm password. Now we're going to do a const handle create user. And what we want to do is console log those. No, that is not what we want to do. We want to first check if password does not equal confirm password. We're going to say passwords do not match, else console log create user. No, that's not it either. So what we want to do is else if there's no email, we want to alert require email. That's if there's no password. And then else we don't need the rest. Let's say they don't want to enter it. We won't require it. We're going to import that function that we created on the auth.js file. So we went sign up. So let's go sign up. We import that up here, import sign up from the function auth. And what it takes is the email. So we want to pass the email, the password, and the user data. So for that, let's just create one object and go const user data equals, and it'll be first name, last name, email, and password. And now we'll just pass that here in the argument of sign up, and then close that function off. And now we have our function to create our user. So if you're not familiar with React, let me explain this to you really quick. We're going to set these variables by using the set function and it's going to set the state of the first name on change. So the way we do that is let's go to our first name and we'll go on change, and it's going to set the variable to whatever we type into that input statement. So to see how it works, let's just create a quick P, and I'll just put this as first name and call that component so you can see it in real time and what it looks like. So we're going to be down here, we're going to be setting the first name to whatever we type in the first name input statement. And we're going to be setting it, and it's going to be creating that variable in real time of first name. And we're going to log that first name in our paragraph over here so that we could see what did we, can't resolve fire. We imported something wrong in our functions.auth. I imported that wrong. So let's go, where is it? Let's remove that, and I'll just import it here. Oh, Firebase /fireauth, and then same with DB. All right. Just make sure you have the right import statement in your functions. So let me do the same thing here in the auth. I'll copy that. And in my CRUD operations, I'm going to make sure that I imported that correctly. Boom. All right. Let's remove auth. Let's go back. All right. Now we're not getting an error. So now when I type in Brett, we can see that it's logging here. Type in Lavar, my name, boom. All right. So it's working. We just got to do that for all of these for this to work and function. So let's go in here. And what we want to do is go back to our create user, and we want to on change all of these. So on change set last name, on change set email, on change set password, and then on change set confirm password. All right, now let's just test our logic up here. First, we got to also call in our button. So on button, when we click it on click, we want to handle that create user function. I'm not going to pass an event through this, and we'll see what happens when we get that error, whether it resets our entire form or not. So let's say my name is Brett Key Body, and my email is tester@gmail.com, and my password is password123. And I'm going to make this one 123 password and make them different. See if my logic works. Passwords do not match. That's great. Okay, it did not reset our entire form, so that's good too. And if we do password 123, let's see what happens. All right, we created it, and let's see if we got anything in the console that would show we made any issues. No issues. So let's go into our Firebase console and see if it created our authentication. Sure enough, in our authentication, we have tester@gmail.com. It created it. Let's go into our Firestore database. And sure enough, we now have a user document that we created that is now stored there with Brett Peabody. The password we don't want to pass into the back end like this. So we're going to fix that right now. In here, we don't want this password to pass in the user data. We just want to pass it as the argument inside of our signup function. All right. But what should have happened is when we logged in into our context, what should have happened is this should have been set to false because we're logged in. So now we got to write that and make sure that it's setting the function or changing the global state of is logged in so that we actually get to the user dashboard. So to do that, let's create another state function called user. We'll set user and we'll keep it null as long as they're not logged in. And then I'm going to use a hook that React offers called useEffect. If you're unfamiliar with it, this is basically a rendering hook that will render certain things we place inside. It's a function that'll render different functions and different callbacks that we want when the page is loaded. So the useEffect will be running as long as we give it the parameters of which to run. So I'll just copy what I have here and then we'll go over it. So useEffect We need to import on auth state changed. We need to set is logged out to false. And then on snapshot, we want to import. We want to import doc from Firestore. We want to import our database from Firestore. We want to import our auth from our Firebase Fire JavaScript file. And then let's change this out to true. Okay, so let's go through this real quick. We're going to subscribe to any auth state changes. So it's going to listen for any changes on the authentication portion of our Firebase app. So if the user logs in or logs out, it's listening for that. And what it's going to do is it's going to take the authorization of the current user if they're logged in. And if they're logged in and there is an actual current user, we're going to set is logged in to false. And then on snapshot, we're going to go get the user from the users collection in our database with that UID that's returned. And we're going to get that doc and set that user in the doc data. Now, one of the things we did earlier is in this auth function, we did not randomly create a user generated ID like we did in our CRUD operation right here. We did not do that with our auth. What we did instead was we created a variable called user when we created our username and password, and it returned that UID and placed that UID inside of our user folder. So if we come here, we have a UID right here. That's our UID matches our document. That's how they're set. So we set the UID to the document, and that matches with the user UID. So in our function that creates the user, how we do that is we wait for that UID to come back that is given to us from the create username and password, and then we set the doc with that UID and store that UID as a parameter inside that object. That way we can utilize it whenever we need to call the current user who's logged into the application. So when we go to our context, what's happening here is it checks to see if there's a current user, and there is. If we go to our React app, anytime you make changes to context, you're going to get that page. Now look, now we're in the actual user dashboard because we wrote that use effect. But let me show you something real quick. When you inspect, go to application, and you're going to go to this index database where Firebase stores a local storage instance of your database. And this is how we know that we're actually logged in. This is what it's checking for. So we don't have to write a ton of token checking mechanisms. Firebase kind of handles that for us through this on auth state change, looking for the current user. And so if it has a current user, it's going to take the UID of that current user, and it's going to look for the document that's associated with that UID and set the user as a global variable for us to access. So now we need to make sure we can access that global variable user by setting it as a value in the provider, and we save it. Now we'll have to refresh this page, but you can see we're in the user dashboard now. So let's go to the user dashboard. Let's close out of all these so we're not confusing everybody. Boom, boom. And then we'll go open our user dashboard. And we're just going to import that user function from the context, or function user variable from the context, so that we have access. And we go, let's just call them by name. Welcome user dot first name. Now, I always like to put a question mark to check to make sure there actually is a user first before we log the first name, because if there isn't, it might break your code. So it's good practice to kind of use that ternary check. Welcome, Brett. Perfect. We've created the user. It's logging the first name, and we have access to everything that we need from the global context of our React app. So it's passing anything that we stored, and we could have stored whatever we wanted and had them fill out in that form. And now we can call it with that user. And no matter what, if we refresh this page, it will always make that call and read that database. because it's checking the stored token. But what we need to do is create a way to log out and test to see if it keeps us logged out through that logout function. So let's go to our user dashboard and create a button. Let's actually just do this. Wrap it in this tag. It's empty tag. And then we'll create a button and we'll call it logout. See if it's there. Boom, we got a logout button. So what we want to do here is we want to handle that logout. So let's write a function for it. And what did we name it in our auth logout? So we can't have it with the same name. So let's just go handle logout. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to call that logout function. And boom. Now we should be able to call it on that button down here below, and it should log us out. On click handle logout. So we're going to click handle logout, and it will call this auth function logout, and the auth is going to sign us out through the auth function in the or through that auth mechanism through our Firebase get auth variable. Here we go. We log out, and now we're logged out. But let's check the index.variable or index.db to see if we're still there. We'll go to application, index.db, and nope, we have no fbase key showing us. And it logged us out. Sweet. So now we're logged out. And if we click around, we can't refresh the page. We can't go to that user dashboard. Can we go back? Nope. Doesn't let us go back. So our route is now protected because they're not a user. And so if we register, let's register another one. Let's go Jamie. I don't even know. That's not how you spell Jamie. Jamie Pearson or something like that. Let's do James at jamie.com. Password. Let's just do whatever we want. Password here. And then we register. Boom. Takes us to the dashboard. Automatically does it because this is the method that we have in our app.js file is checking whether or not that user is logged out. If they're logged in, we go to the user routes, and that's handled here where we're setting that variable in the use effect of whether or not they're logged in or logged out. This is one slick way to handle protected routes on the front end. If you're utilizing a backend, there's other ways to protect it, and I'll make other tutorials on that. But for now, that's what we want to do. So log out. Now we just need a way to log in. So let's create a login page, and we'll do that in our login page. And we'll go const. We'll just set some states, email, set email, const password, set password. Let's import our useState function from React, or our useState hook from React. And then we're going to go const handle login. And how did we have it in our auth function? We need to pass an email, password, and user data. I'll hold that up over there, and then we'll go over here. And then we will do sign. Oh, wait, no, that's sign up. We want to sign in. We just need to pass our email and password. My bad. Sign in with email and password. Boom. So let's go down here, and we'll just copy our create user functionality. I'm just going to copy the email and password. Make it simple. And let's see what this looks like. Email, password, and then we'll just create a button for logging in. We should be good to go. Let's go button. On click, handle login, button login. Look something like that. You want to look at this. So if we come back here, simple login. So let's go to what was our users. Oh, let's make sure the password's gone. Yeah, the password's gone. We took that out of the object, so it no longer stores the password in the database. That's bad practice. Please don't do that. But let's do James at jamie.com. type in the password we created for that account and log in. It should log us in, but it didn't. So let's look at the problem here. We have a typo in our email. So we didn't handle errors when we created this. We didn't create any type of error handling. So a user wouldn't know what happened. They would have to inspect the console, and they're not likely going to do that. So we need to make sure we create error handlers as we create these apps. But let's log in, and now we're logged in. Welcome, Jamie. Pretty slick. That's how we can do it. So let's do it one more time. Test it out. And welcome, Jamie. We're logged in. Now let's log out and do a, what was the other? Let's try the other one and just make sure that that data comes back from the database correctly and that our functions work. And password 123, log in. Perfect. And that essentially is how you create a Firebase Firestore React app. But we wrote a couple other functions down here in our CRUD application. So let's just do a quick update. Let's just do an update because we're already reading the data here. We're reading the data. This is a snapshot listener. It's one way to read it. We could do this exact same thing with get data or get doc. But what we're going to do now is we're just going to update one item. And so let's go into our dashboard. Welcome, first name, blah, blah, blah. Let's go input, type text placeholder, and we'll call it new first name. Just make sure that it looks good. New first name. Oh, wait, we want to put logout at the bottom here. So we don't want it handling it this way. Let's just make this its own block and give it a few spaces. All right, new first name. And then let's create a button for handling that new first name. We'll call it button update name. Let's see. Perfect. All right, now let's go and we'll update this name. So we're going to create a state variable, const new first name, set new first name, import the useState hook. And what we'll do for this is const handle update name. And in our CRUD operation, what did we use? We said update data. So let's hold this out to the side to use it as a reference. Go into this. And what we want to do is we want to update data with the user ID. What did I just import? I think we're good. So what we want to do is we're going to update the data with the user ID, and then the collection name is going to be users, and the ID is going to be the user's UID, and then the data is going to be the data. So let's try this, and let's go on click handle update name, and then on this one, whoops, what we want to do is on change. We want to set that new first name. Why is it doing this to me? There we go. Boom. Now let's see if we can update the first name here. So update first name, let's call him Kenny and see what happens. Boom, we've updated the first name. We should actually clear that out. So the way we can do that, where it automatically clears out, is we're going to set this value equals new first name. And then when we update the data, we're going to set new first name to blank. So that way, when we submit and handle update name, it's going to clear this value out of our input statement. So let's test it one more time. Let's call it Lily, update name, and we have updated Lily in our Firebase Firestore. And if we go over here to our app, it's Lily in our Cloud Firestore. that's how you update it. You can utilize and play around with those functions that we wrote on how to read, write, and update data. I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. Please click subscribe. I want to put out more tutorials like this. I want to go into more depth and really get into some more advanced development and coding operations. I want to do more PHP stuff because that's my foundation. But React, I love React. I love Firebase Firestore. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, yeah, just reach out right down below, or you can email me at lavar@codetega.com and I'll do my best to respond, or you can go to my website, codetega.com. I really appreciate you making it this far and watching it and putting up with me. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful. Yeah, anyways, I'll see you around.